When King Charles II of Spain finally died in the autumn of 1700, his body was so utterly ravaged by a lifetime of illness that the physicians summoned to his deathbed could scarcely believe what they were seeing. He was a man who, for the entirety of his 38 years, had been a monarch in name only, a prisoner of his own failing flesh. But the truly horrifying discoveries they made during his subsequent autopsy were far more than a mere medical curiosity. They were a political bombshell, a grotesque confirmation of a dynasty's decay that would serve as the final, grisly prelude to a devastating war that would engulf the European continent. What the doctors found inside the king wasn't just the story of one man's profoundly tragic life. It was the biological evidence for the collapse of a global empire, a post-mortem on the end of an era. The secrets hidden within his ruined body would provide the catalyst for the fall of one of Europe's most powerful royal houses and plunge nations into a conflict that reshaped the world. To comprehend the profound and multifaceted tragedy of Charles II, you must first understand the magnificent and deeply flawed dynasty from which he sprang, the House of Habsburg. For more than 2 centuries, they had stood as one of the most powerful and influential families in the world, a sprawling network of rulers whose domains stretched from Spain and its vast American empire to Austria and the Holy Roman Empire. Their guiding principle, their unofficial motto, was a masterstroke of political strategy, Bella Gerent Alii, Tu Felix Austria Nube, which translates to, "Let others wage war. You, happy Austria, marry." And for a very long time, this strategy had been astonishingly successful. Strategic marriages were their ultimate weapon, a sophisticated tool used to acquire territory, solidify alliances, and consolidate power, all without spilling a single drop of noble blood on the battlefield. However, this relentless pursuit of power through matrimony concealed a dark and dangerous undercurrent. To ensure that their vast territories and immense wealth remained securely within the family's grasp, the Habsburgs began to turn their strategic marriages inward. They started marrying their own relatives. This wasn't an occasional occurrence. It became standard practice. Uncles were wed to their nieces, and first cousins were joined with first cousins in a deliberate policy of consanguinity. Over the course of generations, this intricate web of inbreeding grew progressively tighter, a dynastic knot pulled so taut that it began to strain the very biological fabric of the family. On a political map, it looked like genius. But in the language of genetics, it was a ticking time bomb. With the birth of Charles II, that bomb finally, catastrophically, detonated. From a genetic standpoint, his very existence was a catastrophe. Modern scientific analysis of his lineage, which involves studying a family tree more than 16 generations deep, has revealed the shocking extent of the problem. His inbreeding coefficient, a measure of genetic relatedness, was calculated to be 0.254. To put that number in perspective, the result of a first-cousin marriage is 0.0625. Charles's number was closer to that of a child whose parents were brother and sister. In essence, centuries of familial unions meant that he had inherited a devastating concentration of identical, and often defective, genes from both sides of his family. From the moment he was born in Madrid's Royal Alcazar in 1661, it was painfully obvious that something was deeply wrong. He was born with the infamous Habsburg jaw, a severe case of mandibular prognathism that was a hallmark of the dynasty. In Charles, this facial deformity was so pronounced that his upper and lower teeth could not meet, making it incredibly difficult for him to chew his food or speak clearly. His tongue was also noted to be abnormally large, further compounding his speech difficulties. But this was merely the most visible of his myriad problems. His subjects, observing his frailties and searching for an explanation in a world steeped in superstition, called him El Hechizado, the bewitched. They simply couldn't conceive of a natural cause for a king so profoundly afflicted. Their belief in a supernatural curse wasn't entirely unfounded in the context of the times. His condition was truly baffling. He suffered from significant developmental delays, not learning to speak until he was 4 or walk until he was 8. He was physically frail and emotionally unstable, prone to fits of hysteria and deep melancholy. Throughout his life, he was tormented by a laundry list of chronic illnesses, epileptic seizures, persistent fevers, and debilitating intestinal issues that left him in a state of constant pain and weakness. His life was not a reign in any conventional sense. It was a 38-year-long battle for survival, and a deeply disturbing prelude to the mystery that his death would ultimately uncover. The final years of Charles II's life were a macabre spectacle, a parade of horrors played out in the gilded halls of the Spanish court. The man who sat on the throne of a global empire was, in reality, a prisoner trapped within his own disintegrating body, and as his condition worsened, the atmosphere in the palace grew thick with desperation. The court became a swirling vortex of doctors, alchemists, and priests, each arriving with their own outlandish and ultimately useless cures, transforming the royal chambers into a theater of medical absurdity. He was perpetually plagued by violent fevers that left him drenched in sweat, chronic digestive problems that caused agonizing pain, and a profound weakness that often confined him to his bed for weeks at a time. As his health spiraled downward, the treatments prescribed by his physicians became increasingly extreme, reflecting the medical understanding of the 17th century, which was still largely based on the ancient theory of the four humors. He was subjected to bleedings and cauterizations, intended to remove bad humors from his body. He was fed grotesque concoctions, including powdered vipers, in the hope of strengthening his constitution. Freshly killed pigeons were placed on his head to draw out fevers, and the steaming entrails of animals were laid upon his stomach in a desperate attempt to soothe his tormented gut. His body began to swell with retained fluid, a condition known as edema, which grotesquely distorted his face and limbs, rendering him almost unrecognizable. Convinced that the king's suffering was not natural but the result of a curse or demonic possession, the court turned to more spiritual remedies. This led to one of the most bizarre episodes in royal history, a series of official exorcisms. Priests, led by the court's chief exorcist, Fray Francisco Diaz, performed elaborate and terrifying rituals to cast out the legions of demons they believed were tormenting him. It was declared that the king was possessed by a spell cast years earlier in a cup of chocolate, a potion supposedly containing the dissolved brains of a dead man, to rob him of his reason. The exorcists claimed to have identified multiple demons inhabiting the king's body, each responsible for a specific ailment. In a particularly grim ceremony, the bodies of his royal ancestors were exhumed so that Charles could lie beside their decaying remains, a desperate act of purification that yielded no results. But no amount of prayer, potions, or profane rituals could repair the fundamental damage etched into his DNA. All of Europe watched this slow-motion collapse with bated breath. The state of the Spanish king was no secret. Charles had been married twice, first to the French princess Marie-Louise d'Orléans, and then to Maria Anna of Neuburg of Germany. Both marriages, however, were conspicuously childless. His infertility was an open secret, a deeply personal tragedy with immense geopolitical consequences. Without a direct heir, the future of the vast Spanish throne and its sprawling territories in Italy, the Netherlands, and the Americas was up for grabs. The two main contenders for this colossal inheritance were the Austrian branch of the House of Habsburg and the French House of Bourbon. Both sides had legitimate claims through previous royal marriages and were already maneuvering their political and military chess pieces into position, circling the dying Spanish Empire like vultures. Agents from both factions filled the Spanish court, whispering in the ears of nobles, trying to influence the weak-willed king. As one historian grimly observed, the courts of Europe were not waiting for him to rule. From the day of his birth, they were waiting for his death. On the 1st of November, 1700, the long and morbid wait was finally over. Just 5 days shy of his 39th birthday, King Charles II of Spain was dead. His passing, while long anticipated, immediately triggered an urgent and perilous question. For decades, a significant portion of the Spanish population and even the court itself had subscribed to the belief that their king was bewitched. This, combined with the monumental issue of succession hanging in the balance, led to a highly unusual decision. A full autopsy was ordered. In an age where the bodies of monarchs were considered sacred, to be anointed and entombed with reverence, the act of dissecting a king was nearly unheard of. But the Spanish court felt it had no choice. They had to know the truth, or at least establish an official one. Was his death the result of poison administered by a rival faction? Was it the final, fatal act of witchcraft? Or was it something else entirely? something hidden deep within the king himself? The team of physicians who gathered in that cold, somber room in the Royal Alcazar of Madrid understood the gravity of their task. Chief among them was Dr. Pedro Francisco de Argels, who would be responsible for recording the official findings. They were not merely dissecting a human body. They were dissecting the fate of a dynasty and the future peace of Europe. Every observation they made, every word they wrote down in their report, would be scrutinized, analyzed, and weaponized in every royal court from Vienna to Versailles. The tension in the room must have been palpable as the physicians made the first incision, peeling back the pale, swollen skin to reveal the secrets that lay hidden inside the king's ruined body. What the physicians reported finding was a gallery of biological horrors that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. Their official report, written in the dramatic and often hyperbolic language of 17th century medicine, painted a devastating picture of a body in a state of near total systemic collapse. The first shocking claim, recorded by Dr. Argels, was that the king's body did not contain a single drop of blood. While this is, of course, a literal impossibility, it was their way of describing a corpse that was shockingly pale and wasted. Medically, this points towards extreme anemia and cachexia, a profound wasting syndrome where the body loses muscle and fat. As they proceeded to examine his internal organs, the discoveries became even more disturbing. His heart was reported to be the size of a peppercorn. This was likely a dramatic descriptor for an organ that was severely shrunken and atrophied, a condition known as cardiac atrophy, suggesting his heart had been failing for a very long time. His lungs were described as corroded, as if eaten away by acid, which could indicate years of chronic, destructive respiratory infections like bronchiectasis. The report described his intestines as a rotten and gangrenous mass, a sign of widespread infection and necrosis, possibly peritonitis, which would align with his lifelong, agonizing digestive ailments. Then came the finding that confirmed what everyone at court already knew. They found only a single testicle, which they described as being black as coal, a clear sign of necrosis and atrophy that provided definitive proof of his infertility. Charles II could never have produced an heir, the very duty for which he was born. Perhaps the most disturbing finding of all awaited them inside his skull. When they opened the cranium, the physicians reported that it was full of water. This is a clear and unmistakable description of severe, chronic hydrocephalus, a condition where cerebrospinal fluid accumulates in the brain's ventricles, causing immense and sustained pressure on the brain tissue. This single finding could explain a great deal of his lifelong suffering. His intellectual disabilities, his developmental delays, his seizures, and likely constant, splitting headaches. To complete the grisly inventory, his kidneys held another grim secret. They contained 3 large, calcified stones, physical evidence of the chronic and agonizing kidney problems that had plagued him. Today, we can attach modern medical names to the catalog of horrors that the 18th century doctors could only see as the work of a curse. The generations of intense inbreeding likely resulted in Charles suffering from multiple, rare genetic disorders simultaneously. Researchers, analyzing his symptoms and the autopsy findings, have hypothesized that he suffered from a combination of combined pituitary hormone deficiency, which would explain his short stature and overall weakness, and distal renal tubular acidosis, a kidney disease that prevents the blood from being properly acidified. This kidney disorder could account for his rickets, muscle weakness, and the kidney stones found during the autopsy. The hydrocephalus might have been a consequence of a childhood infection. Without a direct DNA sample, no single diagnosis can be confirmed with absolute certainty. Ultimately, Charles II was the victim of a perfect genetic storm, a man whose body was a living, breathing monument to his family's obsessive and self-destructive pursuit of pure blood. The grotesque and shocking details from the autopsy report quickly spread like wildfire across the courts of Europe. They served as a potent and macabre form of propaganda, becoming a powerful symbol for the decay and degeneracy of the once mighty Spanish Habsburg dynasty. The king's withered, broken body was a perfect mirror for the state of his empire, hollowed out, dysfunctional, and ready to collapse. But the autopsy itself, for all its political resonance, did not start the war. The real trigger was Charles's last will and testament. In the final, lucid moments of his life, Plagued by the terrifying prospect of his vast empire being carved up and dismembered by foreign powers, Charles made a fateful decision. Influenced by his pro-French advisors, most notably Cardinal Portocarrero, the primate of Spain, he signed a will that named Philip, the Duke of Anjou, as his sole successor. Philip was the grandson of France's powerful king, Louis XIV. This was a political cataclysm. The idea of a Bourbon monarch on the Spanish throne, potentially uniting the colossal empires of France and Spain under a single dynasty, struck terror into the hearts of the other European powers. The delicate balance of power, which had structured European politics for a century, was about to be completely shattered. In 1701, in direct response to this threat, the Grand Alliance was formed, led by England, the Dutch Republic, and the Austrian Habsburgs, who felt cheated of their inheritance. They declared war on France to prevent the Franco-Spanish Union. This was the beginning of the War of the Spanish Succession, a brutal and sprawling 13-year conflict that has been called the First True World War. Battles raged across the continent, from Spain to Italy, from Germany to the Netherlands, with massive armies clashing in bloody encounters like the Battle of Blenheim in 1704 and Ramillies in 1706. The conflict even spilled over into the Americas, where it was known as Queen Anne's War, with French, Spanish, and English colonists, along with their indigenous allies, fighting for control of North American territories. The tragic, intensely private suffering of a single man, a torment caused by the rare genetic disorders that wrecked his body from birth, had created the precise power vacuum that tore Europe apart. The story of King Charles II of Spain stands as a chilling and unforgettable lesson in how a royal dynasty's obsession with power and the illusion of pure blood can lead directly to its own self-destruction. The horrifying list of ailments meticulously documented during his autopsy was not the work of a supernatural curse or a demonic possession. It was the predictable, tragic, and scientifically logical outcome of generations of systematic inbreeding. His body had been a battlefield of genetic decay long before foreign armies began marching across Europe to claim his throne. The autopsy didn't just close the book on the sad and painful life of a pitiable king. It starkly revealed the final, corrupted chapter of a once unrivaled dynasty, a story written not in ink on parchment, but in the garbled, broken code of its own DNA. It served as a grim and lasting warning to the royal houses of Europe about the devastating price of prizing political purity above all else. A price ultimately paid in the profound suffering of one man and the spilled blood of an entire continent. If you found this deep dive into a dark corner of medical and royal history fascinating, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more stories that dig up the hidden truths of the past. Let us know in the comments what historical mystery you think we should investigate next.